Thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to be here. I've attended a whole bunch of Creative Zen events, and I love the fact that it's just really casual. It's like this. I want to talk no more than 15 minutes, so if you would track my time, please, because there's a bunch of really cool people in the room. I'd rather have a conversation with you afterwards. But I love the fact that in spite of myself, and I have to say this, I've become I would say, successful serial entrepreneur. Part of me still goes, how the hell did that happen? And so I wanted to share with you some things around my journey and some moments that stood out that propelled me forward, and also a few things that I've learned along the way about myself. They may apply to you or may not. One of the things I think of conversations I've had with strangers who had no idea about the sort of impact they had on my life. So one happened in 1999. I was living in Manhattan at the time. I had just gotten a job for a big international training company. It's the first time I worked with corporate clients, and I had a little voice that said, what the hell are you doing with your life? Like, we're like, what the hell? How did this happen? I knew I was making more money than I had ever made. So this was my first day on my job, and I had a mentor named Herminio Hernandez. I was just there watching Herminio for 3 days teach a program that I was learning. And on the first day, what this company did is, Herminio had a little credit card, company card. He took clients out for a round of drinks to a cocktail bar. So I'm sitting at a cocktail bar of a hotel in Manhattan, 53rd and 6th Avenue. First day on a new job where I was questioning what I was doing with my life. And the woman I'm speaking with, a participant in the class, she was an elderly lady to me at the time. She's younger than I am now. But we're sitting at the bar, and she said, and she was the head of training development for a big blue chip Wall Street firm. And she said to me, I have this philosophy in life that every 7 years you pick up and do something completely different. And she said, I left Paris 7 years ago to come back to Manhattan, and I feel a big change coming up. And we were just blabbering the way on. But that comment completely set me free in the sense, I went, okay, this is what you're doing now. You don't have to do this for the rest of your life. So this notion, and I'm looking at you, Dick, because you talked about how life is not linear, when you gave a talk last month. I realized life is not linear. This is just what I'm doing right now. Totally freed me up. Another conversation about 3 years later, I'm at, again, this cocktail party in Manhattan. I'm talking to this guy who I don't know, and you know how you say, oh, what do you do? What do you do? And he said, I own a temporary staffing agency, and I have an office in Brooklyn, and I have an office in Tampa. Out of my mouth comes, completely unfiltered, I said, I could never do that. And he looks at me and said, of course you could. And I suddenly realized, what the hell did I just say? But I realized I clearly had this belief that I could not be an entrepreneur. And it was definitely based on the fact that I really had no skills on how to run a business. But so, number one is, I would say, notice the innocent things that strangers say to you, because those conversations were profound for me. I'll take you to another Manhattan moment. About a year after that conversation, I'm sitting with a fellow at a cafe on Sheridan Square in the West Village. We had just met socially, and he was an adjunct professor at Hunter College, and he was very excited that he was writing a book on improvisation that was about to be published. Now, I want to give you a sense of how judgmental I could be. In my mind, I'm going, God, the world doesn't need another book on improvisation. Of course, I say the right thing. Oh, God, Dan, I'm so happy for you. That's great. Right? But what kicked in then, and I'm telling you the story because this served me really well in my life, I have a competitive side. And the competitive side said, if Dan can get a friggin' book deal, I can get a book deal. So this is where, so Dan actually inspired me. 6 weeks later, I had a book deal with his publisher. And it's funny because it was a book about public speaking, and you could say the world does not need another book on public speaking, right? But I knew exactly what I wanted to say that was different. And they even gave me a little advance. But that wouldn't have happened if I didn't feel a little competitive with with Dan. Now, if I connect some dots for you, I knew that when the book was coming out, I said, you probably need to build a business around this. You're an author now. You can't keep working for this other training company. And I remember that conversation with that fellow where I said I could never do that. So what I did, and again, this is something that served me really well, a friend of mine in Manhattan had told me about an organization called Small Business Strategy. And it was like a think tank for small business owners. They don't exist anymore. And I said, let me go to Small Business Strategy for help. And they had like a think tank, because I host masterminds now. I know it's really a facilitative mastermind group run by a woman named Kathy Elster. And what I loved about this, and for the rest of my life, I don't do anything alone. I am a heavily supported human being. I make no decisions alone. But it started with that experience. I was in this group for a year. In the group were a woman who ran the largest, most successful personal organizing business in Manhattan. She had about 30 employees. There was a guy who had a textile manufacturing company in Long Island City, also about 25 employees. And there was a woman, Jeannie Nicolosi, who had just started her own talent agency for Broadway talent. She's now one of the biggest agents in Manhattan, but she just started. And there's me. I had nothing but a book deal, right? But those conversations that year, and ironic, I'd gone back to school to finish a degree at NYU because I felt like I needed an advanced degree. The year in that group and that support was more valuable than anything I learned at NYU in 5 years, in my opinion. And I loved the NYU experience. I made 2 decisions in that group, supported by these brilliant people who are much more advanced than I was. One was I was going to have an international business. And the reason I'm telling you this, like I didn't have a single friggin' client. I had no idea how it was going to be an international business. But I gave it a name. You know how sometimes you can say, a lot of companies are Achim Nowak and Friends or Achim Nowak and Associates. I said, no, I'm going to have people working for me. I'm going to have associates. So it can't just be me. So I came up with a name called Influence, which is the Latin origin of influencing. So intentionally a non-English name because I wanted to be international. The second decision I made, again, I'm telling you the story because none of this I would have done without the support of people that knew more than I did or were smarter, was that because part of being a business, I said the idea is like, I hate the idea of finding clients and always selling. Like this is the hard part of being a business owner. So I said, I'm going to only pursue companies with 2,000 and plus employees. And the idea was, if I do a good job, they're just going to keep calling me. And my friends joked. They said, well, everybody wants those clients. They do, but I decided that that's where I would play. And it took me a year and a half to get that first client in that space. And the phone has been ringing ever since. And when I support senior stakeholders, when they move on, they bring me along, and I still have the old client. So it's been complete organic growth. And that business, which I've since sold, we worked in China, we worked in every country in Europe, we worked all over the world. And what I want to share with you is, I've learned that I'm allowed to have a vision first without knowing how it's going to manifest. Does that make sense? Because if I worry about how I will get there, I will talk myself out of it. So the beauty of it was, I'm allowed to have the vision for an international business, and I'm allowed to say, these are the clients I want to attract, even though I had no idea how I would find them. Ironically, my first South Florida client, the way I framed it up right now, there are virtually no clients from me in South Florida. There aren't, which is why I do very little work here. But my very first client was a commercial finance company based in Coral Gables that I was referred to, that was just sort of below the threshold of what I wanted. They had about 1,800 employees. And they kept me very busy for 2 years. And then the guy who was my angel sponsor in there went to HSBC North America and brought me along. And suddenly I was in a big playground. The other thing about being a business owner, the biggest fear that many of us have is, I'm going to be working really hard and burn out. right? I'm going to be working. It's much easier to have a 9-to-5 job. The boundaries are clear. And I decided I want to make as much money as I can quickly so I can hire my first person who will do all the things that I don't like to do. And again, it's funny, it started being very clear about that. A year and a half later, I had that person. And for the last 18 years, I've always had, the job title I give folks is relationship manager. I've had a relationship manager for the last 18 years. One thing I've learned, I think what makes me happier than anything else, because I was poor for so long, and I've been blessed financially, so I've done well. But I've learned that I'm a good boss. I treat people really well. I pay them more than my competition does. And people love working for me. And that's the best feeling. And everybody who works for me, at some point, I encourage them to actually move on. So the last person with me for 8 years, while she was with me, I encouraged her to go back to graduate school. She got an MSW. She's a practicing therapist now. The guy I had before with me for 5 years, he wanted to work for the police in the animal canine unit. So he went back to school and studied that, and now works for the police in Jacksonville. And I found a way of encouraging their dreams and being totally flexible with how we worked while we're doing that. And I have somebody right now who, I love him, he's originally from Nicaragua, and he said, you know, I can only commit to a year for working with you because he also has his own business. Well, I know he's going to be with me for years. We're already in year 2, you know, and the fact that I've learned to be a good boss who respects people and plays well with them has been really meaningful. So support and having support in my life has been just really critical. The woman who ran Small Business Strategy, Kathy Elster, became my business coach for 15 years. That's a really long time. And it was hard to separate her because after 15 years, I felt she was not challenging me enough anymore. It was too comfortable of a relationship. But the fact that somebody knew my business inside out, you know, and part of my journey was having the courage to earn enough that I could make all of that happen. The competitive part in me, I can be pretty stubborn, and like people will advise me on, well, you should do this to market your business, you should do that, and they're often very good ideas, but I go like, I don't friggin' feel like doing that. Okay. When my second book came out, I have 3 books out. When my second book came out called Infectious, Kathy said to me, you know, your job is to help sell the book, so what are you gonna do to sell the book? And I knew that was my job, and I really thought, well, the publisher can sell the book, you know, I'm just the author, you know. So what it led me to, and again, I want to give you a sense of what motivates me as an entrepreneur. Many of you may know who Jennifer Granholm is. She works for the government right now, and she was, I think, the governor of Michigan at some point. Well, her husband is like sort of a leadership guru thinker in my space. And he had a weekly message mailer called Reading for Leading. This is about 10 years ago. And I looked at Reading for Leading, and I went, that's good, but I can do better. So that whenever the I can do better kicks in for me, so I said to Kathy, I can commit to my own version of this. I'm going to call it Energy Boost. And so I put out something called Energy Boost, which I've gone out to, and I have a list of people for 9 years now, every Monday morning. And it felt good to me because I'm a writer. I'm not selling anything, you know, I'm just classic, you know, being helpful to people. And there was a time in my life when 5 years into the Energy Boost, I said to Kathy, I'm so bored with this Energy Boost. I don't want to write the Energy Boost anymore. She just said, why don't you rethink that? I think it works really well for you. So I got over myself. The other thing, it's so interesting. I decided to play on Twitter, you know, and my attitude about Twitter 19 years ago was just horrible. I think that's fast food communication. It's just all friggin' bullshit. Am I going to do Twitter? But the mental lever was, I'm a writer, and you write short messages. Let me play on Twitter. And I know that when I did, so the message here is, I do very few things, but the things I do, I'm fully committed to. So on Twitter, I realized there's a strategy on how to get to know people on Twitter. There's a strategy on how to play it. I would say within 6 months, everybody in my leadership space, I knew through Twitter, not personally, but they all knew who I was, I knew who they were. I realized I can meet these 300 people. It's actually a small playground. Because I traveled for work, then I also realized, I remember being in Boston, and there's a writer named Tom Asacker, who I love. If I had to mention one of my favorite books of all time, it's called The Business of Belief, Tom Asacker. And I knew Tom. I said, Tom, I'm in Boston. Can we just have lunch? Yeah, we had lunch. We liked each other. So there's a guy named Faisal Haq, serial entrepreneur from Bangladesh, amazing guy, lives in Stamford, Connecticut. I said, Faisal, I'm in Boston. Can we meet for lunch in Stamford? We did. Through Tom Asacker, I got a speaking agent. Not because I was chasing that, that's the point, right? It was we had a genuine connection, which would never have happened if I hadn't committed to Twitter. Because of Faisal Haq, I have a writing agent in Los Angeles. She's amazing, who sold my last book. Again, not because I was hustling to get anything. And then I got bored with Twitter. For about 4 or 5 years, Twitter was great. And then I said, and this part of it, I said, I don't want to do it anymore. And that one I let go. But I to this day, and I have a podcast, and I'll wrap up with this. To this day, I have the people who I met through Twitter land. There's a woman named Martina McGowan who is one of the leadership thinkers. She's a ferocious African-American woman, the physician who has a beloved leadership blog. We knew each other. We'd never spoken with each other. She just published her first poetry collection called I Am the Rage, which is a wonderful title. She's 70 years old now. I was thinking, I think I want to talk to Martina. And so I recorded a chat with Martina last week, and it was wonderful. So it's given me all those things. When it comes to a podcast, because you have a podcast, people always said to me, you should do a podcast. And I think the thinking was, I'm a trained actor, I have a decent voice, and I've written 3 books on leadership. And I said, I don't friggin' feel like doing a podcast. I know everybody's doing it, and it's a good idea, but I'm completely unmotivated. Well, about 1.5 years ago, I started a mastermind group called The Fourth Act, really catered toward people who'd been very successful, were ready to retire, but wanted to play some more and investigate more in life. So The Fourth Act is really plays off of the idea that a traditional well-made play has 5 acts. And the 4th act is, after the 3rd act, you worked out most of your personal drama. The conflicts have been resolved, but you're not ready to die. So the 4th act is this wonderful playground where you're not ready to go to hospice care, but there's time to play while you're not trying to prove anything to yourself. It's a beautiful thing. So then the moment I realized, this is the podcast I'm willing to do, but the moment for me, I said, I'm going to do this podcast because when I do something I want to commit to and I want to do it right. So I said, let me call my friend Paul Zelizer in Albuquerque. Paul has a podcast that's been hugely successful. And this is where I'm a really good student. Like I talked about, the competitiveness has served me, but what's also served me is going to people who know more than I do, which Paul did. I said, Paul, I want to launch a podcast. What should Hugo and I pay attention to? And we spent 1.5 hours with Paul. And I said, Hugo, we're doing whatever Paul says because Paul is smarter than we are. And we're going to do what he said. And we did that. Let me close with this. I'm going to take you back to the 90s in Manhattan. The inner shift I had to make to be able to do this serial stuff. And I've done other stuff that I didn't get to talk about. I used to go to this business for lack of a like business support group in Manhattan in the 90s. It was primarily artists or people who were self-employed. And it was a meeting Sundays in the West Village, Manhattan. And the way the meeting would start, we'd meet for an hour and a half. Everybody needed to state what their vision for themselves was. And you had to say it in a sentence or two, so you couldn't blabber forever. But there might be 50 or 60 people, so it took about 20 minutes to go around everybody to say their vision. Because a lot of creatives were, somebody say, and then you affirm it as if it was already so. One vision was, I have an Academy Award by the time I'm 40. Okay. Judgmental Achim, I'm smiling going, but that'll never happen. Or somebody says, I am publishing a best-selling novel. My mind said, that person is deluded. These were obviously all judgments about me, right? And my own vision and my fear of having a strong vision. But because everybody had to state a vision, it was like, shit, I have to say something. And I went to this meeting for 3 years. So I said, what do I say for myself? And the question was, do I do a big aspirational vision, or do I do something very specific, like I'm winning an Oscar? So the vision I came up with is, I am a channel for personal and global transformation, and I consciously experience love every day. So every Sunday, I would sit in that meeting, I'd say, I am a channel for personal and global transformation, and I consciously experience love every day. And a conversation that stands out for me that I love, because we're all so good at killing each other's visions. A fellow came up to me 3 years later and said to me, he said, I used to think you were full of shit. And I realized that is actually what you're doing. I was at the time working in the Middle East and facilitating dialogue between Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians. So I was like doing some cool stuff. And the point of it was, when I said that vision, which is very big, it was a classic purpose vision. I had no idea how that was going to happen. But what I learned in that meeting, I'm allowed to claim that. And I do feel like that's the life I have created right now. And it continues to grow and change. But I'm very grateful for it. And just to wrap it up, I moved to Hollywood 18 years ago. There's so many things I love about this city. But I've lived here, and people would always joke, well, you love living in Hollywood because you get to leave and fly all over the world. Like you get to get out of Hollywood. But what I love about it, it's allowed me to slow down. It's allowed me to get to know people. It definitely feels like home, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you. And if you're so moved, let's just chat. You can ask me questions for more.